In any life, we have highs and lows, light and dark, wins and losses. What happens when we encounter that moment in time when what happens next could change everything? Join us as we step into another person's inspirational moment and see how we can connect their experience to ours. This is Greg Stevens, and you're listening to A Shot of Inspiration. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of A Shot of Inspiration. My guest this week is a new friend. We forged away a new friendship together over the last couple of days. Her name is Melanie Gao, and I actually saw her. You might have seen Rita Clyde, and Rita was a guest several weeks ago. And she said, you got to meet Melanie. You got to listen to her. And Rita sent me a TED Talk that Melanie had done in Nashville. And it was amazing insight, just an amazing talk that Melanie did. And we got this set up pretty quickly, and we had a pre-call for about 30 minutes and just hit it off. And I know that I've got a new lifelong friend, but Melanie's got some amazing stories. And I encourage you to go look at the TED Talk. I'm not going to give anything away. I'm going to let Melanie talk a little about it. And then we're going to talk about some other things, because we talked about having that same conversation. But Melanie texted me this morning and said, I think I want to go a different direction. And I love that, because it's going to be organic, nothing set up. Meet my new friend, Melanie Gao. I think you're going to love what she has to say today. She's an inspirational person to me. And thank you, Melanie, for being on the show.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. And thank you, Rita, for being the great connector that you are in connecting us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Greg, I so appreciate you letting me take this story where it needs to go. Like you mentioned my TED Talk, and that was a pivotal point in my life from watching the talk, that I share some childhood trauma that I experienced and how I processed it and how my family processed it. And when that talk aired at the end of 2020, it really put me in a special place. Like, I can't even describe to you what it's like to come out of the trauma closet and live outside of the trauma closet, but it really made me reflect and think and put me in a special place. But on top of that, say at the beginning of 2021, January 2021. So I was newly out of the trauma closet, but also we're a year into the pandemic at this point. And I myself had been a leader in healthcare during the pandemic. I was not in a hospital or doctor's office, but I was leading a team in the leadership development organization at a healthcare company here in Nashville, and just leading a high performing team through a pandemic in healthcare. A year into it had really started to take a toll on me. In addition to that, I am a single mom, and I had two kids at that point, a 17-year-old and a 19-year-old. And their dad is a great dad and very engaged, but he lives in China. So obviously, as the pandemic set in, it became clear that it's going to be on me to take care of my family and to get us through this health-wise and in all ways. And that kind of put me in this like a hypervigilant headspace. It was like I got to a place where I was always scanning the horizon, trying to figure out what's the newest threat. Is there going to be a new variant, or is there going to be social unrest, or is there some kind of commodity that we're going to run out of that I should stock up on now? And I just felt so responsible for my family and our lives that I went into that hypervigilant mode. And after months and months of that, I was really starting to feel the effects of anxiety, and maybe even anxiety bordering on depression. So it just really had me I was not in a good space at all. One important thing for you to know too about my life at that point was, I mentioned my kids were 17 and 19. So my daughter, the older one, was in college. She had come home in the early days of the pandemic, but she was back at school. My son, the younger one, was just about to graduate from high school and go off to college. I was an up and coming empty nester, and I was trying to figure out, what's that going to mean for me? Like, I've always been a single mom. I'm about to be still single and still a mom, but not really a single mom anymore. So I was just grappling with what all that means. And I think that the net effect was that this one Saturday morning in January, I woke up, and the first thought that I had when I opened my eyes was, I have got to give myself a break. And it was just so clear to me. But then I thought, okay, so what do I mean by that? And I thought, I want to quit my job and I want to do nothing for a year.
Wow.
That was what I wanted.
Most people would love that, but it's frightening when you face it, isn't it?
It was very frightening to hear this voice in my head because I was like, I can't do that. I'm a single mom. Yes, my kids are about to be young adults off at college, but in our family's case, I was still going to support them. Their dad and I were still going to financially support them through college. So I can't really just drop out of life for a year. So my first thought was, no, I can't do that. But I have had this career coach. I've been lucky to have a career coach named Denise Wolfe, who one of the things Denise recognized about me is that I tend to have a lot of self-limiting beliefs. I'll tell myself no when, just as an initial response. And Denise got really good at challenging my self-limiting beliefs. And she would often ask me the question, what would it take? Or what would it look like? And so I just thought to myself, okay, what could that look like? And so I got out of bed. I opened up my laptop, opened up a spreadsheet, and I just started building scenarios. Like basically, I cataloged, here's what it costs to keep myself and the kids alive. So here's expenses, and here's what I have in savings, and here's some income that I'll be getting in the next few weeks. And I kind of netted it all out. And I put together some pretty crazy scenarios. I was like, what if I went and lived in a houseboat? What if I went and lived in an RV? But I also had a scenario that I really loved, which was, what if I rented out my house in the city and I bought a tiny house and I went and lived in a tiny house for a year?
Yeah.
And I had my eye on this one particular tiny house community in East Tennessee. It was in the woods on a lake. And just for some reason, it was pulling me. So when I worked out that scenario, rent out the house in Nashville, go live in a tiny house for a year, I got really excited. I was like, oh, that feels like something I want to do. And so I had these options. And I started to think, okay, so if I'm going to live in a tiny house for a year, what will I actually do? Because I don't want to take a year off of life and just go watch Netflix for a year, which,
Right.
Greg, left to my own devices, that might have been what I would do for a year.
It's easy to binge when you're in that mode too, because it's a relaxing state. You haven't been in that vibration for a while.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, some Netflix is going to be all right, but I feel like I need some other projects. One thing I thought was, so I had this friend named Ted who has been hiking a pilgrimage in northern Spain. It's called the Camino. He's been doing this every year. And he would always come back and he'd tell me about his hike and his insights, and it sounded so fantastic. And I always wanted to go with him, but I had a job and I had kids and I couldn't do that. But then I thought, oh, wait, if I'm going to take this year off, that could be my year to join Ted and hike the Camino. So I contacted him and I was like, are you going this year? He says, yeah, do you want to come? And so that was my first thing that I started to get super excited about again, was I could walk the Camino with Ted. That would be so cool. And then I thought, okay, but then I'll come home from that pilgrimage and I'll still have time. What would I do? And I thought, I've always wanted to write a book. I just never had the space or the time. So I thought, okay, that could be my opportunity to write my book. So I'm really thinking about the Camino, the book, the tiny house. I was getting super excited about it. I had my spreadsheet that said I could do it. I would dip down into my savings some, but it wasn't going to be as bad as I might have thought. But I felt like I needed to validate this plan with some people who were a little more objective and maybe had different expertise. And so the first person that I called up was my financial planner, Tim. And I went in to talk to Tim and I showed him my spreadsheet and I said, Tim, I want to know two things. First of all, I want to know, am I missing anything? Look at my plan, tell me what I'm missing. And second of all, from your perspective, I want to know if you would advise me taking this year off. So Tim looked at my plan and he said, I don't see anything missing. This is a very good plan. He said two things. He said, one, everything could go off the rails if you have any unexpected healthcare expenses. So I want you to think about what you would do in that scenario. And he said, two, I see that you're planning on this bonus that you're going to get from your company in March. And he said, I don't know about your company, but bonuses can be discretionary, meaning if you turned in your notice before the bonus lands in the bank, they could make the decision not to give it to you because they don't have to. So he says, if I were you, I would wait until that bonus lands in the bank before you turn in your notice. But that turned out to be a really good thing, Greg, because what it meant was, oh, I have to sit with this for a while. I can't just throw any switches yet. I need to sit with this for about 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. That was really good because sometimes I would sit in meetings and if they would get super frustrating, I'd be like, yeah, you know what? I'm not going to be doing this pretty soon. It was just really nice to reflect on the decision, compare it to my daily life, and feel more and more sure that, yeah, this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, probably solidified exactly what you wanted and why you wanted it as you did that. So there wasn't any second guessing or doubting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think one of the things when we truly make the decision, everything else, it's not about the decision anymore. It's how we get to where we're going. Once the decision's been made, that's the hard part. I remember when I decided to go to college, where I decided to go, and it was much more expensive than a state school, all that. None of that mattered. It was like, what do I do now to get through that? So that's what I hear you describing.
Exactly. Once we get really clear on the what is it I'm doing? Once you're really clear on that, the how is just a matter of execution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can be difficult. Sometimes it's simple, sometimes it's more difficult than you wanted it to be, but that doesn't change the direction you're going.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think especially when it's difficult, that's when you look back on it and you never regret the what. And you typically don't regret the how because you've done the work to set it all up.
Yeah. And I think all those things are preparing us to make the whole journey. You don't get to, we think we're prepared to make that journey. Many times there's things we have to learn along the way to be able to complete it. And that's what happens. We have to build some of the plane while we're flying. It just comes out that way, but it couldn't have happened any other way. Yeah.
Exactly. And looking back, you recognize it, which is the lovely thing about hindsight. You looking back at college, me looking back at this year off, we can look back at it with hindsight and see things more clearly than maybe we did at the time.
Tell me real quickly what happened when you did. It sounds like you did leave the organization, obviously, but tell me real quick, what was it like to turn in and say, I'm going to go do something else for a year? What was that like?
That was hard. That was the hard part because I loved that organization so much. I loved my boss, Laura. I loved my team. Saying goodbye to that, it was really hard. It was not a see ya suckers kind of moment. I wish it had been. I wish that they were more jerks than they are. They're not jerks. They're wonderful people. Made it hard. That made it really hard. And that phone call where I told my boss, I'll never forget, we both shed some tears. It was a tough conversation. But I also feel like, how lucky am I that I was in a place where I loved the people so much that leaving them was hard.
Yeah.
Grief is the price we pay for love, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we grieved for sure. I definitely.
I'm going to ask you to go back to the day after you had that conversation and you wake up. What'd you feel like?
Oh gosh, Greg, it's funny you would go to that. Okay. It's a pandemic. We're still working at home. I'm in my home office on my ground floor. And I had these beautiful French doors that led out to a screened in porch from the office, the room I was using as an office. And the day after I made that announcement, I was on a team meeting and I turned my camera off for a second and I went and I just opened up both French doors. And by this point, it's a beautiful spring day. Warm air's coming in, the smell of cut grass. It's just a beautiful sunshiny day. And all that's coming into my office. And also, I just had this very clear realization. I see how I'm going to get out. Like, I've just opened this giant door for myself and I'm about to walk through it. And it's funny you would go there because that was such an impactful moment for me to be in the moment, be in the team. I'm still working, I'm still getting a paycheck. So I got to be focused. And yet, here's this huge opening, these beautiful doors leading out into the spring.
Yeah. To me, I find when people do sever that piece and go out into something new, that first day after is like a whole new experience in life. And something shows up. And it's interesting because I find at that point, most people don't talk about the fear ahead of them. They experience that moment. And it's really, when you really look in that moment, you're in the right place. This is where I'm supposed to be right now in this time in my life. That's what I've experienced.
Like the fear is there.
Yeah.
There's always going to be fear.
Yeah.
But it feels small compared to everything else that's out there for you.
Yeah. It's like when you think about it, being a kid again and going out to a new adventure. His parents taking you somewhere. And I think we pick up that piece of being a child again, something you got to explore. And we lose that so often as adults. We really do.
And kids are sometimes so blissfully unaware of all the dangers out there.
Yeah.
And I'd say that's the space that I had gotten into. I knew there were dangers out there. I knew there were risks. I had my spreadsheet that said I was going to be okay. And that allowed me to get more back into that maybe childlike state where I was excited and not so worried about those things that could go wrong.
Yeah. I got to hear, did you get the tiny house? Is that the way you went?
And that was just a miracle because they were a hot commodity. And this one family put their tiny house on the market and had 5 offers by the end of the day. And through some miracle, they took mine. And so I got to move into the tiny house.
That's great.
Before I made the move, I did check in with 2 other experts after my financial advisor. One of them was, remember he had mentioned, if you have any unplanned healthcare costs, this could all go off the rails.
Yeah.
So I thought you should really check in with my PCP. So I went to see her and I told her the same thing. I was like, hey, I'm planning to take a year off. I'd have to switch to private paid healthcare. It's going to be low premium, high deductible. And she did some routine diagnostics, annual exam, blood work, colonoscopy, mammogram, skin check, like all the basics, and said, you look good to go for me. So that was reassuring to know. It doesn't mean I'm not going to have any unexpected health costs, but the chances are lower. But my last phone call, Greg, was to my counselor. And I was lucky that I've had a counselor for 10 years. So he knows me very well and he's seen me through lots of life events. So I called Mike up, that's my counselor. And I said, Mike, here's what I'm planning. And I said, for you, I have one question. Am I having a nervous breakdown? Because I said, I think when people break down, they're not aware that's what they're doing.
It's interesting.
And he listened to me and he said, I don't think you're having a nervous breakdown. He said, I think if you continue down this path that you're on and you don't give yourself a break, you might be headed that direction. But he said, no, you're not having a nervous breakdown. You're giving yourself some time off. You're doing self-care, and that's wonderful.
And it looks since then, everything's confirmed what he said, correct?
Absolutely. That year off was, I did hike the Camino, which was fantastic. I went and lived in the tiny house. I did a lot of hiking there. I made fires in my fire pit. And there was this one night in particular where I could really tell that I was in a better place again, because I was sitting at my fire pit at my tiny house, and there were not many people in the development during the week. Most people came just on the weekend. So during the week, I had the whole resort to myself. So I'm pretty much alone at my fire pit. And in one hand, I had a s'more. And in the other hand, I had a cup of Jim Beam. Just being honest.
I love it. Two essentials, right?
Great, thank you.
That's great.
In the woods behind me, I started to hear twigs snapping. And I thought, okay, what is that? I was like, it's not a squirrel. That's not something small. That's something big. And there were coyotes in the area. And I thought that could be a coyote. And then I also thought that could be a person coming to hurt me. I don't know what's in the woods back there. Yeah, like all those thoughts go through your head. And I'm telling you, like a year prior, I would have been up out of that chair. I would have been in the woods with a headlamp and bear spray and ready to tackle whatever's out there. But here I am a year later, sitting there at the fire pit. And I just thought, there's a chance that's something that's going to hurt me, but it's probably not that likely. And if something does come and hurt me right now, I'm going to die with a s'more in one hand and a cup of Jim Beam in the other.
Life is good.
Exactly. I thought, you know what, I'm going to be okay. And I just sat there at my fire. And that just to me was such a contrast from the hypervigilant, anxious version of me that I had been just a year before. Yeah. That's how I knew that the year had been worth it and did what it was to do.
Well, for me, what I heard in that, you released control.
Say more about that.
When you said that, it's like you stopped trying to control anything around you and you released, and it's a process. I think we go to get there. It's having the conversations, running the spreadsheets, looking at everything. And many of us, some people are able to just let go right away. Some people have a process to do it, but it sounds like at that moment when you said that, I just got this whole thing of complete surrender. I don't know if you ever listen to a guy named Michael Singer, but he has a book called The Surrender Experiment. And it's about his life, but it's about letting go and letting things show up how they're supposed to, because that's where anything else is illusional, that we have any control over something. But we have this illusion that we do. And that we think it keeps us safe, but many times it keeps us from expanding and trying.
And I think it's such a contrast to the mindset that we have in corporate America, which is, you can't leave this up to anything. You can't leave this up to the universe. Right. You need to control this. You need to be able to show me the steps that you're going to take to get to the result, and what's the result going to be.
And it's good to have one of the things I've found, there's the plan, but also most what I look at now is the direction. And I'm going the direction I want to go, because many times if I lay it out, it needs to look like this. What I thought it needed to look like, it can look so much better if I let go of it. The direction doesn't change, but that specific thing. And I'm learning that right now, because there's, with putting my mastermind together and some other things that I'm doing, I had these ideas of how I thought it needed to look. It has to look like this. And then it doesn't, but it ends up many times being much better than I could have ever come up with. I would say the majority of the time, much better than, I don't have the imagination for what can actually really happen in my life if I try to control it, because my imagination isn't that good. I got a pretty good imagination, but it's it's nothing like what I've seen show up over the past 6 months to a year and a half. So, well, tell me, during that time, what are some of did you get your book done? Also, what inspirational things have you come across that maybe you'd like to talk about, that maybe some lessons learned or insights that you were able to share and help others with?
Yeah. One thing I learned about myself is that I spend way more money than I thought I did. So the line item in the spreadsheet that had my budget to spending money, I should have multiplied that by about 12. So anyway, I learned that about myself. I did write the book. Thank you for asking. It's not ready to go out yet. I think it's going to tell me when it's ready to go. So I'm holding it until it tells me it's ready.
Have you titled it? Have you titled it? And
I've
that's
thought
okay
about
if you haven't, because I understand I'm writing a book now. They have the title, I think, but I think also it's going to tell you what it wants to be called.
So far, its working title is Righteous S'mores. Oh, I don't really know if that's going to make a difference, but I think the biggest lesson is what you were describing from Michael Singer and maybe others, is just surrendering and recognizing that the plans that the universe has for us are better than the plans that we might build for ourselves, if we can just trust. If I set my course and say, I am driving to Vegas, I am going to get to Vegas. I surely can. But maybe the universe has something even better in mind for me if I will just allow myself to deviate a little bit. Like you said, directionally, you're heading in the same way, but allow the universe to nudge us in a particular direction.
Yeah.
And I think one of my biggest indicators that the universe is going to take care of me if I will just surrender was, I mentioned that I bought this tiny house in the spring of 2021. I also stopped working in spring of 2021. But what I didn't realize is that when I stopped working, the house was going to start working, meaning it started increasing in value like crazy over the course of the year. And when my year was over and I was getting towards the bottom of my bank account, I realized that my house had appreciated in value so much that I sold it, and the universe replenished my financial position, not only to where it had been, but a little bit better.
Yeah.
Who would have thought that when the universe said, you need a break, take a break, I'll worry about everything else, you just go rest.
Yeah.
That the universe had such an amazing plan for me.
Yeah.
And really the goal is for me is to just surrender. Like you said, that's a beautiful way to say it.
It really is. And when we do that, we get to that point. It's so funny. It's freeing and it's fearful. One of the things I thought the other day, what's the distinction between hope and faith? And I realized it's action. It's hope until I put action into it. When I put action to it, I'm living in faith. And faith can sometimes be just stepping out into that unknown. What you did, you had hope, you hoped all those things, but the faith was you stepped into it. And the universal law, I believe, is when you step out there, you're rewarded to it, because it doesn't leave you hanging. I think the universe hates a void. It's going to fill in, but most people don't let go of what they have so they can grasp on to what they really want. There's a thing where I can't remember where I heard this, but if they're trying to capture a monkey or something, they put a ball in a jar or something and they grab it and they can't let go. They can't let go. They won't let go because they're trying to get that ball. And then someone comes and grabs them and they let go, but they could have been free the entire time. But they wouldn't let go of that thing. And I think that's a great picture for most people in their lives. I've got this thing, I don't want to let it go, but there's a whole universe and world out there that could occur if I just let go of what I have. because what I have is going to be let go of anyway in the end.
Isn't that amazing? Like that process of holding on to that thing, whatever it is, what stops us from getting out. We
Right.
have to let go to get out.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's letting go, surrendering, whatever you want to say. But it takes, that's the leap of faith. That's the first step. And we go from hope to that leap when we take action, I think.
And I think the letting go, it's hard for me anyway. The letting go is hard for me because if I empty my hand, I don't know that anything else is going to come into it. Maybe I will let go of whatever that was and nothing comes into my hand. This is odd.
Right. I heard Eagles song yesterday. I put this on my website. It was a song Already Gone, but it says, so often it happens that we live our lives in chains that we never even know we have the key. And that you had the key to let it go and you took it, but most people don't. And I encourage, if you're listening, listen to Melanie's story about letting go and stepping out. She didn't do it just haphazardly. She checked her spreadsheet, all those things. I thought it was interesting also that your financial planner said if you have health problems or something, I don't care how much money you have. If you have health problems, it can wipe you out no matter where you are financially. So that's another thing, one of those limiting fears, that in fear always distorts what you see when you're looking at something with fearful eyes. You're not looking at what really could happen. I've seen people say, if this happens, does that really happen? You haven't lost your problem solving skills when you step out there. You've had a world of wisdom that you have that you're not applying in what you're looking at here. But we typically look at, oh, from where I am, what if everything stopped? That's not how it works. You still have all those skills and insights and things to help you get through life, even if you make a change.
That's so wise. That's so wise. Fear would make you think that thing is much more likely to happen and that you will be much less able to deal with it.
It says it's bigger than you, but you're bigger than it in reality.
That's a great way to look at it. You're so right.
Well, Melanie, is there anything else you would like to encourage our listeners with? And folks, this isn't the last time you're going to hear from Melanie. We're going to have Melanie on. I can guarantee you more. But is there anything you would like to leave listeners with today, inspirational, about maybe a lesson you've learned, maybe someone you've helped as you've coached, maybe a little story, anything?
Wow, that is a great question. Inspiration that I didn't already share through the story.
Yeah.
I feel like we've gotten almost all of it, except that I feel like by sharing this story with you and having you reflect on what you hear through it, it's making me experience my story even differently. And I think that's one of the best things about sharing our stories is that we get to share it with another, which connects us. Storytellers to me are the greatest connector that we have. But also it helps us see our own story and our own selves differently, thanks to the gift of someone else's perspective. And so I guess one thing I'd love to say is share your stories. We all have amazing stories to share, and you may not think that yours is inspirational. I didn't think mine was inspirational, but it's so great to share them with people and let that connect us and help them grow and help ourselves grow.
Yeah. Melanie, thank you so much for being on today. And I look forward to what our friendship blossoms out there in the world, what we can do together. And folks, I want to say thank you for attending and listening to another episode of A Shot of Inspiration. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A Shot of Inspiration. If you like this or any of our other episodes, make sure you rate it and share it with a friend. This is Greg Stevens, and we look forward to being with you next time. Until then, be bold, be courageous, and respectfully speak your truth.